Hello everyone, so today I'm going to be giving some feedback that is long overdue. This video should have been done months ago. To the people that submitted work on the Discord, I'm so sorry this took so long. There's a bunch of reasons why it did, which I won't go into. But yeah, really sorry, you obviously took the effort to create these pieces and it took me way too long to do it, but hopefully me doing it now is still relatively useful. So with that, I'm going to get started. This first piece here, really cool. I really like it. I think overall it's pretty successful. Hopefully, you're pretty happy with the piece. Okay, so what's working for the piece? In general, I think the character design is really interesting. It's quite impactful. As a design, it makes sense. I can read every form. Everything kind of makes sense to me. Compositionally, I think it's well considered. There are some changes I'd make, but overall I think it's quite successful. It does the job. I just think maybe there are some things that could be improved. One of the things I want to talk about, I always check this, the value structures, and what's really great is that the clothing and the skin stand out from each other, which is great, and you've got kind of different separations from each piece of clothing. So you've got the kind of dark material here and then the slightly lighter one here. I think that works quite well, and everything else kind of jumps out. So I like it when skin separates from the clothing. I tend to think that results in a better, cleaner visual. And I've got some examples, or one example maybe of where that's done successfully as well. I think maybe the issue I'm kind of getting with this image, one of the main issues is lighting, just because it's a little bit confusing. So it looks like you have a sunset kind of going on back here. And if that is the case, if that's what you were going for, the character lighting is kind of incorrect, because you've got a light that looks like it's kind of coming from this direction, or maybe even just straight above, because you've got shadows here. The character's obviously very well lit, so you've got kind of like a lot of light here hitting parts of the body, and you just wouldn't have that with a sunset. So I've got an image, or a couple of images here, that are really great examples. As you can see, the flowers, if you walk outside during the daytime, how bright these flowers would be. During a sunset, they become silhouetted against that bright sun from behind them. Obviously, the lower the sun goes, the darker these get. So yours might not be as dark as this, but they're definitely heading towards a darker value. Same with the rocks on the left. You'll see the floor still relatively well lit, and that's because as a plane, the floor like this is facing upwards, and the sun is coming across and hitting that plane. So that still is receiving sunlight. But the rocks, any rock that faces away from the sun, so all of these rocks that you can see here are facing this direction, except for these, they have lighting on them because they're facing upwards, like that. But then this rock here is facing this way. They're all quite dark because they're facing away from that sun. So it's about you considering where your light source is and imagine your faces of your object, what direction they are. So imagine every object as a cube. If my sunlight is coming in this way, this will be relatively dark, this will be relatively dark, and this one will be lighter. Okay, and that's what you need to imagine every single form you create. Yeah, so overall, basically what I'm trying to get at, your whole image would be darker. So if I just grab a brush real quick, the skin, you'd probably be pushing towards this kind of value. And what that's going to do is create a nice silhouette against your background, which is really great. So it's going to look more like this, and then maybe if you have a secondary light source coming from the front, you can start to pick out places where you want the light to catch and draw the eye. So usually that's towards the face. So you can kind of design it in a way that you force light to come towards her face, and it won't go as bright as maybe you've designed it, but you can add a little bit of light there, maybe a little bit there, like kind of the general areas you've added it. Maybe you'd be catching some light, but not the way you've added it. And also metal is obviously going to catch a little bit more, but it's still going to be those darker value structures. Under here, it's going to be really dark because it's hidden by this cloak. So any light source is going to struggle to get to that. So if I kind of toggle that on and off, you can see with the darker light source, it starts to solidify the person in the environment a little bit more. And that's kind of echoed throughout the whole piece as well. So you've kind of got this directional light creating shadows this way, which again goes against the light on her. So you've got a few things here where they don't quite line up, essentially. Other than that, I think you've done a pretty good job. The anatomy looks pretty solid. You've clearly used reference, which is really great. Compositionally, definitely nothing wrong with it. It's a little bit safe. I think overlapping would be beneficial. So one thing that you might want to try, I don't know if this fits your narrative or what you're trying to create, but this sitting behind her. Something like that kind of starts to add depth, and you'd want to kind of resolve that nicer than what I've done here. You'd want to make sure it fits and it doesn't look kind of weird overlapping. This does look a bit strange, I will say, so maybe it's not the perfect idea, but in general, if you can overlap designs, that's what you want to do. So it adds depth essentially to a flat image, because we're trying to fake the look of 3D, right? Because it's always going to be a 2D image, but we're trying to make it look 3D. So looking at this building here, we can tell that building is behind this balustrade thing that she's sitting on. We know that because the building gets cut off by it. So overlapping is really great to add depth to a 2D image, and you could probably use more of that. I think just other things, more objects. You kind of got some weird placement going on. So I quite like this section down here where you can tell there's a city going on behind these balustrades, and that's great. I really like that. In general, the kind of bottom half is nice. This guy up here feels very off in the corner. I'm not sure why it's there. A better placement would have been beneficial. And if you've got a lot of things floating in the air, you could have done some interesting stuff. So silhouettes could have kind of come from behind her here, maybe. Yeah, basically I would have reconsidered the sky. It felt like you put so much focus on the character and kind of ignored the background, which is, you know, if you have time constraints, that's the right way to do it, so that's okay. And one final thing I'm going to say, the building here, it's worth rendering lighting on the building even if it's really subtle, and you've done a pretty good job here. So you've kind of carved out shapes using really simple lighting. You've kind of created that shape which adds depth. It makes it feel like a real building. But then this one, because it's a soft gradient over here, it just looks wrong. I'm instantly drawn to it and I don't really know what it is. So if I bring up a Magic the Gathering reference, they've done the same thing you've done in the background. You can see that they have carved out shapes behind the character, creating really subtle architecture, and it reads really well. And you only really need two values. You got the light side and you got the dark side. That's all you need to do. So going back to your image, you literally just need some architecture going down here, kind of separating however you want that designed. You know, whatever you want to do, light and dark, and then that would read much better. But yeah, overall, I think really good. I think it's a solid start. I think a few little tweaks here and there, and you'll be creating some really nice art. So well done. Okay, this one's really great, really nice. I really like this image in general. I think the design overall is really strong. I'm not really going to talk too much about the design. Lighting, you're clearly capable of painting a directional light source, which I think is really good. The only thing I've done a really quick paint over previously just to see how a rim light would look to add a little bit more depth. So I'm going to just turn that on. I essentially darkened down here a little bit and then added a rim light kind of coming from that left hand side, and I've done it really quickly. It doesn't look perfect, but it kind of gives you an idea. I feel like it adds a little bit more mood, and maybe that's just not what you're going for, and that's absolutely fine, but I just wanted to see how that would look. A few little things I think maybe could help this visual and help you improve a little bit, and these are going to be quite subtle because I feel like you are you know, quite an accomplished artist, so you're already doing a lot of this stuff correctly. Just cleaning up the focal points. So when you add texture like this, it draws the eye and it adds detail. And as soon as you start adding that kind of detail, I want the rest of the design to be more refined. So when you see brushwork like this that doesn't quite clean up the form, it starts to become a bit jarring when you've got high resolution detail surrounding it. It's a bit like throwing a photo into a photo bash where everything else is kind of blurry and then you've got one really high res texture. It doesn't really work. So just be careful, and I think with the head you could have spent maybe 15-20 minutes longer just polishing that a little bit more and then left the rest kind of unrefined like you have. That works fine. But yeah, up here could have been refined more, and I would have been removing the black. So you've got these kind of black outlines around here, you've got the very dark shadow there, all pushing very close to black, and around the lips pushing very close to black. I'd be looking to remove those. Make the visuals a little subtler. So if I'm grabbing that color, let me grab a brush. Because you're kind of at the point where you can zoom in a little bit more and then grab that darker value you had but lighten it a little bit, like this. And then you can always add like a rim around there like that. And it's just going around the visual and starting to clean that up. Maybe even simplifying the form in some areas. Like that. If I kind of zoom out and turn that on and off, you can kind of see just cleaning that up a little bit. Doing that around the entire image would work really well, especially like round here, like kind of reinforcing why you've created those kind of shadow shapes. Again, I'd be softening that shadow underneath there. And if you feel like it's all starting to get a bit too dark, then it probably is. So I'll be kind of softening that shadow there, which allows me to go a little bit brighter with my shadow there. Cleaning this up, and then if you want kind of like leather kind of material, which is what it kind of looks like, grab a leather reference. I haven't got one up, so this won't look that great. Go in and start to polish the design a little bit more. With this being a curved surface as well, maybe you want to draw a little bit more lighting to that area there. So as you work on it longer, you start to just push the forms a little bit more, and you can start to refine the shapes. And I think that's the main feedback I have for you. Everything else is working really well. Your scale is really good, so the size of the hands is really nice. Size of the head, your proportions are great. The angle of the shoulders and the angle of the hips is really nice. It's a well-balanced character, which is really cool. Placements of the knee, this one here feels a little bit off, but it's not too bad. And the only other thing I'd say, whenever you add metal to material, consider how it connects, because this is kind of just floating on top of the material. To solidify that design, it would have been really cool to have maybe like a belt buckle, and then it kind of would have pulled in the pants, allowing them to open up like you've drawn them. I feel like that would have made a little bit more sense. So you have something there and it tightens there, then it pops out like that, and that just would have made it feel like a little bit more like a realistic design. Other than that, really good work. Great stuff, and I love these drawings, very cool. Okay, with this next one, really good, really nice character design. You can tell I don't really know The Last Airbender very well. It's kind of like a gap in my knowledge, but I love the fact that this is orthographic view, so you've done a front, side and back. I think that's a really great process to develop, and it looks like you've done a pretty good job of lining up kind of most of these points. So the belt there, yeah, you've done a nice job overall of lining up the figure. And if you didn't do this and you kind of lucked your way through it, then this is a good process to follow by drawing those straight lines in and trying to match them. Often you can take this design and mirror it, so duplicate it, mirror it, flip it, and then draw it in backwards to make sure it's kind of exactly the same. That's what I know a lot of people do, but it doesn't look like you've done that because this arm is a different pose than this one. Yeah, which is interesting. Main thing I would say to work on is your anatomy. It looks like you have drawn this as it is. So it looks like you've drawn, when you're drawing the arms, you're kind of drawing the material in like this, and you're going, okay, this is where the arm is, on the cuff there, and I'm going to put a hand in here. It looks like you've drawn that way. What I want you to draw is the anatomy in first, without the clothing essentially, and use references. So find your shoulder points, find your torso angle, your hip is there, and then your leg goes to your knee there, down to your foot. The other one looks like it's there. It's kind of hard to tell because of the baggy trousers. And then the arm there, and there. And if I turn this off, not terrible, but this arm is definitely too long compared to this one. If you imagine, they're at similar angles by the look of it. And this one's much lower down here. So there are definitely some anatomy issues. Hands, I feel like you could maybe do some studies on hands, especially grab a photo of a clenched fist and just see how that works. 1, 2, 3, 4. Looks like you've maybe got 5 fingers as well with a thumb, which is something to watch out for. Other than that, it's like a weird, maybe you've added an extra line back to them, I'm not sure. But that attention to detail, we always look at hands and heads, essentially. So that's 2 areas where you need to spend most of your time. And they kind of look like the 2 areas where you spent the least amount of time. Now again, I'm not sure on your inspiration and maybe what references you were using, but if you were looking at it as a realistic anatomy, you're going to want to look at how the neck joins the head, because yours looks almost like it's kind of bolted on, like an animatronic. So study that, study how a neck connects to the chin and how it connects to the back of your head, because that's worth studying. And also how thin your neck is here. Again, that might just be a stylization, but it'd be interesting to see what references you used for that. But other than that, great job. I think the pose is really interesting. The lines here for shading I think is really interesting, and I think the shading in general is heading in a good direction. But just work from a real world reference first for the anatomy and then build the clothing on top. If you want to improve more realistic drawings, I would say that's the direction to head. But great stuff. Okay, yeah, this is pretty cool. I recognised this. Again, I haven't seen much of Clone Wars, but I know this is a character from that. And it looks like you have drawn over a photo from Clone Wars. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but if I zoom in, like you've given me quite a high-res image. And just the way you've drawn it is different to this rendering. So I'm guessing you've drawn over it, which is absolutely fine, as long as you're not trying to sell it as your own design. It looks like you've kind of taken their design and then drawn the Japanese armor over the top, which is a great process. I think that's really beneficial. The first thing that immediately jumps out to me is the missing hand. And I know you said that this was a work in progress, so maybe you were just going to get round to that. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But I think always get the hard things you struggle with in first. If you're avoiding the hand because you can't draw them, then that's what you need to be drawing a lot of, just as a general rule. And I think this is pretty good overall. It's kind of hard to judge because it does look like you've been drawing over something, so I can't really critique the head and I can't critique the general proportions and anatomy because I'm not entirely sure they're yours. If they are, then you've done a pretty good job. I think proportion wise it looks pretty strong. Silhouette here, like this could be removed, like that bit there, to kind of bring that in a little bit before it kind of pops out. You're always looking for a strong silhouette, so this kind of comes in then comes out. That's more interesting than out and then out and then up and then out, just as a general reference. This here looks really long to me. I feel like, yeah, the design of this would probably be wider. Something like that would be better. And then you kind of, your hand down here. And lighting, I think, is the only other thing that you'd want to maybe work on. You've got the lighting blocked in, or you've got the general shapes blocked in, but I can't tell the direction. So if you're following this reference here, the face, this left side is lit and this side is in shadow. So I would try to follow that. So if you're going to add light to this here, you're going to be wanting to add light there, and then same here. And then even here, this is kind of tricky because it's in shadow probably of the arm, but you might end up with something like that. It'd be worth trying that out, seeing how that works. And then this here for her chest, this would be in light. This bit here would be in shadow. So if I go darker, that would be in shadow there, because if your breastplate is going to need to curve somewhat. And again, follow your reference. If it's a completely flat breastplate, and then it's just going to be flat. But it looks like you've drawn it curved, as you see here. So if it is curved, this curves under like that, so that all of that's going to be darker. And the only final thing I'll say, when you're drawing this kind of stuff, if you've got something wrapping around the body, look for the kind of angle it needs to wrap, because I make this mistake a lot and it's quite tricky. But as an example, you've kind of got this curve here like that. And from the angle your feet look pretty flat. So it looks like the feet are on the horizon line. So you're going to be looking up at the character for the most part. And that looks pretty accurate. It's kind of hard to work out with this design where the center point is, where your horizon line might actually be. It's kind of hard to measure it, but if you can work that out, or you already know, so let's say as a rule it was there. This curve here, it's currently curving up as if we're looking up at it, but it might need to be curved down, or it might need to be straight. So it kind of depends on your general perspective. So this one here definitely looks wrong to me. I'd be looking to kind of flatten that out more. And this bit here looks like it should be in the center. But so far with your body, it looks like your center point is down here somewhere. And then your torso, like your leg, jumps over here. So you've got like a weird torso going on. It's almost like the legs are there, but then the body kind of appears over here. So again, this leg might need to move. So there's like loads of little anatomy issues, and I think maybe that again is you need to draw the figure in before you draw the clothing. It didn't really look wrong. It's hard to tell with what you've drawn because this is so big and bulky. It's always really hard to tell with anatomy. But using this as an example, you've kind of got that there, be that there, and then the leg for me would need to be kind of over there somewhere, like that. But yeah, other than that, I think you're heading in a good direction. I think it's just more detail, more refinement, and if you are using references to kind of paint over, have a reason in mind, have a goal of what you want to learn, and go from there. But yeah, good stuff. Awesome. I think this is the last one. Really cool. I like this a lot. Sorry, I had a layer that I was just trying out to see how that looked. I love the mood of this. This is really cool, and I love the compressed values. So here isn't too dark, and neither is this. If I kind of choose these colors, down here is dark, but then see immediately it kind of jumps up, and then up here it stays there. But it allows this to get darker above and below it. I think that's good value control, and I think that works really well. So great job on that. Character design. And mood of the piece is really great. I find your eye instantly goes to this character, which is fantastic. That's exactly what you want. And the pose in general, like you've got these very angular lines in the clothing even, very cool. If you're heading for like a very stylized piece or a stylized process for your work, that's what you're interested in creating. I think you're heading in a great direction. And the lighting is really cool, so I really like the lighting catching the feet coming from the right hand side. And I think design wise, adding a torch coming off of them so near to them, creating this light is really clever. I think that's really cool. Now obviously the lighting is not particularly realistic. You're making it more dramatic and more stylized than it would be in reality, but I think that works quite well. I think my only kind of critique with this piece, I added a slight glow just to bring a little bit more light into the area. It's not really needed, but it's just a minor tweak. My main challenge of this, and it's a simple design, so it's not really wrong, but this is mostly blank space. You have this as your focal point in the image, and the rest is essentially blank space. That's not really a problem, but it could be more interesting. I think you could create a more interesting design if this guy took up less room, essentially. This guy here took up less room. If he was slightly smaller, slightly further over here, or slightly more in shot, more of a focal point, maybe less blurry, that might make it visually slightly more interesting. But this feels like a device for us to ignore, but provides depth for us to then look at this character. But then there's no depth behind him, which I kind of like. I find that's quite interesting. But when there's also no depth in front and there's nothing leading the eye, there's not much to the image essentially, and I think that could be improved. Maybe you could have something at the foreground, I don't know, just to kind of bring the kind of angle of the pose in like this, and then he could be kind of lower over here, or even just moved across slightly into this kind of area. And then you could potentially have something more going on in the background, more of these kind of figures, but maybe they're slightly more refined so you can see more of them. but it's not like, that's a critique that's not really needed. This does work as an image, but it's just if you want to push it to that next level. This currently feels almost like a storyboard frame rather than like an illustration. So if you want a storyboard frame, this is great. If you want an illustration, there's some things that you can push more with composition to make it a more compelling image. But overall, really great stuff. So that's it for those images. Hopefully that was really useful for you guys to see that. Again, a huge apology for not getting that to you sooner. I feel really bad about it, but it's just one of those things. I've just been so busy with work and additional work as well, with freelance stuff and moving house. It's just been a mad time. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And yeah, great stuff. Keep up the good work, guys. I know you're all trying really hard to improve as artists, which is absolutely amazing. And any comments, drop them below. Thank you very much. I'll catch you in the next one.